All right. Well, John, let me start out with talk to me about how you got involved in politics to begin with, and what made you finally decide to seek a seat in the legislature.
Well, I guess it was back around 1965. Woody Ryals, who was a member of the House of Representatives from Hillsborough County, lived in Plant City, was a dear friend of mine, and Woody was an attorney there, and I was born and raised in Plant City, so I'd known Woody Ryals all my life. And Woody was chairman of the Mental Health Committee in the House of Representatives. And Woody asked me one day, there was a conference being held, I think in Pensacola, Panama City, and he asked me if I'd like to go and attend the conference with him. And he wasn't feeling all that well and wanted to know if I'd drive, so I said sure. So Woody and I took off from Plant City in my car, and we drove up to Pensacola, I guess it was, and we attended the conference. It was like a 1-2 day conference. And on the way back, we stopped in Tallahassee and came into the state capitol and went by Woody's office, and he introduced me to a lot of people. And I was, I guess it was really my first time of ever being in Tallahassee in the state capitol. And I was 30 years old, I guess. And so on the way back from Tallahassee back to Plant City, Woody, he said, I need to talk to you about something. And I said, all right. He said, I'm not going to run for re-election. And I said, why? And he said, well, I've been there a long time, and he said, my law practice needs my attention, and my family needs my attention. And remember, Mike, we only made $100 a month back in those days. I mean, it was not because of the financial gains that one wanted to serve in the Florida legislature. And Woody said, I just need to devote more time to my family and my law practice. And he said, I think it would be great if you'd run in my place for my seat. I said, man, I don't know about that. I had been involved in some campaigns. I had helped Sam Gibbons in his first campaign for Congress when he ran, and we were fortunate enough to get Sam elected. And so I thought about it, and then Woody kind of started talking it up, that I should run for his seat. And so I did. And I was fortunate enough to get elected when I was 32 years old in 1966. First time I ran for the Florida House of Representatives, I won.
And so I presume, did you have opposition, or did he clear the way for you?
Oh, no. He could only do so much. Yeah, it was a county-wide race in Hillsborough County, and we had just been awarded, I think it was 2 extra seats or 3 extra seats in Hillsborough County, and so one of those seats had always been sort of Plant City seat, and Jimmy Redmond, my very dear and closest friend, decided that he wanted to run for the legislature the same time I wanted to run. And so we sort of decided that Jimmy would run for the seat that Woody had held, that particular district number. And I would take one of the new districts, because at that time I had then moved from Plant City over to Brandon. So it worked out really well for me. It worked out really well for Jimmy Redmond. And that's how but I did have 3 other opponents in that first race. I had an attorney in Tampa named John Childen, and I had a realtor in Tampa named Jack Rodriguez, and I had a Afro-American bail bonds woman in Tampa named Mary Alice Dorsett. And we had a primary, and the first, when the votes were counted, Jack Rodriguez had about 20,000 votes, and I had about 18. And then John Childen and Mary Alice Dorsett came in 3rd and 4th. And so we had the runoff 3 weeks later. The Tampa Tribune in that first race had not endorsed anyone. They didn't really know any of us all that well. And so I guess Mr. Rodriguez, who was a fine gentleman in Tampa, thought that he probably had it pretty well locked up, because he thought he had all the Tampa vote, and all I really had was the Plant City and some of the Brandon vote. And the Tampa Tribune came out and endorsed me in that second primary. And when the final votes were cast, I ended up with about 25,000 votes, and Mr. Rodriguez went from 20 to about 21,000. And that was the final outcome, and I came to Tallahassee in 1967.
So it was the Tribune endorsement, you think, that did put you over the top?
I think there were several things. Yeah, I think the Tribune endorsement played a large part in helping me to get elected. Mary Alice Dorsett, the Afro-American bail bonds woman in Tampa, publicly endorsed me went on the radio stations in Tampa, and in particular the black radio stations, and publicly endorsed my candidacy. And it dealt, so between Mary Alice Dorset's support, which I have never forgotten, and the Tampa Tribune's I've never forgotten, and the good people of Plant City, who we carried about 90% of the vote out of the Plant City precincts. It was just an overwhelming victory. In the Tampa precincts, of course, Mr. Rodriguez ran well too, but it was basically the Tribune, Mary Alice Dorset, and the Plant City votes that really put me in office. Those were the three key factors. So why I began my legislative career in 1967.
How is it that you got her endorsement? Did she seek you out or you her?
Well, we went to talk to her immediately after the election. We had, of course, met each other on the campaign trail. I don't really know how campaigning is today on the local level because I really haven't been involved in it in a number of years. But back in those days, it was quite a grind. We would make 3 or 4 public appearances a day and night. I lost over 20 pounds during that campaign. Wish I could have kept it off, but I didn't. But I looked like a rail when I first came to Tallahassee. I've got some pictures that were taken of me and the legislative delegation from Hillsborough County on the old Capitol steps. And we all looked like scarecrows. We were so thin because we had been through campaigns. But we got to know each other pretty well during that campaigning period. I got to know Mary Alice Dorset. I got to know John Children, the attorney. I got to know Jack Rodriguez, my chief opponent. And I guess when it was all said and done and the first primary was over, Mary Alice, I assume and I hope, felt like she had more confidence in me representing the people of Hillsborough County than she did in Mr. Rodriguez. And I asked her for her endorsement. I called her up and we met and I said, I would really appreciate it if you would help me in this campaign. I need your help. And she said, I would be delighted to. And she was at my home the night of the victory, when we won that night, and along with about 500 other people. And I was delighted to see her there.
You know, it's interesting, in a number of these interviews, a lot of people don't remember their opponents, and it's interesting you remember all of them. I remember all.
Well, we only had 4 in that first race. And oh yes, I remember them, and then I remember some I had in subsequent races. Patrick Henry, a fellow named Patrick Henry, who was a steeple chase or steeple jack. He painted TV antennas. I remember Mr. Henry well. I remember the Reverend William Hamilton, who qualified to run against me. And David Watson from the Tampa Tribune called me and he said, something is just not right here. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I need to check this guy out. And so David found out that Mr. Hamilton was actually living in Pinellas County. Had been defrocked from his church and had left his wife and had moved to Pinellas and wasn't even a legal resident of Hillsborough County. So he was automatically eliminated when that was brought to the supervisor of elections attention in Hillsborough County. But yeah, I remember most all my opponents well. We had some tough races in the early going. Once we sort of got our feet into the legislative process and started doing things and being able to become effective, then it seemed like the opposition kind of waned. In the last 7, 8 years that I was here, we didn't really have any opposition. And for that, I've been extremely thankful.
Now you came, and immediately the legislature's, Claude Kirk called special session before you even got here, and then you're declared unconstitutional and have to run again.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. We arrived in Tallahassee, I guess, we were elected in '66. We arrived in '67, and Governor Kirk called a special session of the legislature. And the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to have that. You're a malapportioned legislature, and literally threw us all out of office. And we continued to operate, and we tried to come up with a reapportionment plan. And we did, and Professor Manny Dower, University of Florida, also submitted a plan. And I think there were 2 or 3 other plans submitted. One by an attorney in Miami, as I recall. But anyway, the Supreme Court finally made their decision, and they selected one of those reapportionment plans. And then, of course, we all had to run again under that new reapportionment plan because we legally were not in office. Well, that was a terrible situation for the candidates, not for the people. It was a very justifiable thing for the people because we were malapportioned, and frankly, the pork choppers, as we call them, were pretty much in total control of the legislature at that point. And so I found myself in a delegation of 7 members from Hillsborough County. There were 7 of us, just elected. All of a sudden, we've now got to run under this new reapportionment plan, which calls for our new district to be composed not just of Hillsborough County, but from Hillsborough, Pasco, Hernando, and Citrus. 4 counties in our jurisdiction. We also went from 7 members to 9 members. We picked up 2 additional members, or 2 additional seats. And so I found myself running for re-election in Hernando County, where I really didn't know hardly anyone, in Pasco County, where my ancestors came from. My father was born in Pasco County in 1872. And I quickly found some relatives in Pasco County. In fact, Mike, I'll tell you a funny story. And this is a true story. We were running really hard, and I went to Zephyr Hills to make a speech. The JCs were having a forum there on Saturday night in the park in downtown Zephyr Hills. Went flying up there, me and Elvin Martinez and Bill Register and Guy Spicola. We all went kind of like in a caravan, to these political rallies. And I got up and I made my speech, and I said, I'm John Ryals, and I'm from Brandon, Florida, originally born and raised in Plant City. I'm running for re-election to the Florida House of Representatives. And we have a new district, and while I'm not all that familiar with Pasco County, we plan to represent you to the best of our ability, and we will find out what the issues are. And just gave them kind of a general little political speech and told them how much I would appreciate their help and their support. We finished, came down off the little rostrum there in the park in downtown Zephyr Hills, and I walked over, and there was an old, kind of a real elderly gentleman standing up under an oak tree with a cowboy hat on and a cane, like a lot of old Florida cattlemen used to be a part of their attire. And my dad was a cattleman. That's what he did. We were in the cattle business. And I walked over to him, put my hand out, and I said, I'm John Ryals, and I'd really appreciate your help. He introduced himself to me. He said, oh, yeah. He said, I know you. He says, I know your family. And I said, well, I appreciate that. And I said, can you see your way clear to vote for us? He said, yeah, I'm going to vote for you. He said, I like most of those Ryals. But he said, you see that oak tree right over there? I said, yes, sir. He said, that's where we hung so-and-so Ryals for horse stealing back in the early 1800s. I said, you got to be kidding. He said, no, we hung him right on that tree. He said he stole a horse up here. And I don't know if that's a true story or not, but it was told to me as a true story, and it really kind of shook my foundation a little bit. I thought, Lord, I didn't know I came from a family of horse thieves, but anyway. Anyway, we carried Pasco County, we carried Hernando County, we carried Citrus County. We carried all 4 of those counties, and Hillsborough, of course, in that new election deal, and came back to Tallahassee.
Did your opponent from 66 run in 67 again?
No, he did not. No, he did not.
Do you remember what kind of money you spent having to get reelected?
It wasn't a lot. I really can't remember, honestly. It's been so many years. Maybe $10,000, $15,000, and that would have been a lot of money.
So you get to Tallahassee, you're in session. Give me a sense of, as a freshman legislator, what it was like to come to Tallahassee for $100 a month and be here most of 1967.
It was pretty traumatic, really, because as you recall, we just kept going from one special session right into another and another and another. And Governor Kurt was governor, and that was exciting, to say the least. Me being a Democrat and he being the first Republican since Reconstruction days, having been elected, there was some friction there. But it was an exciting period of time. Ralph Turlington was speaker, as I recall, and it was just a hard day-to-day grind. But we got a lot accomplished. A great deal of things were accomplished during that period of time.
As a freshman, did you play an active role in the Constitution revision process? Because you did serve 10 years later.
Yeah, 10 years later, I guess it was, I served as a member of the Constitution Revision Commission. I was appointed to that by Tucker. Yeah, pretty much so. One of the things that we did in '67, it was the first bill that I ever introduced, and probably the bill that I guess I'm the proudest of. Prior to 1967, the driver's licenses in the state of Florida were little pieces of paper. And if you were a real enterprising student in high school or wherever, all you had to do was to get a little whiteout, and you could just type right over your age, and you could change your age, and then you could use that as a legal document to go buy beer and etc. And I was on the Public Safety Committee. Bill Reedy was chairman of that committee. I was on the Public Safety Committee, and I got to know some of the people at the Florida Highway Patrol, and we talked about it, and they said, you know, one of the big problems that we have is counterfeiting of driver's licenses in the state of Florida. And there's a couple of states that have gone to this new system. It's a photographic driver's license, and it's laminated, so it can't be tampered with, can't be changed, can't be counterfeited. We also have a problem with counterfeiting of driver's licenses, particularly in the Miami area. They had broken up 2 or 3 counterfeit rings down in Miami where they were just literally churning out driver's licenses. And so they said, you know, we really need some way to improve our driver's license product that you carry in your wallet. I said, well, maybe we could just go to a laminated photographic driver's license. And so with the help of the Florida Highway Patrol, we really started looking into it. And they came back to me and they said, we can do this. Would you handle the legislation? And I said, yes, I would. I'd be delighted to handle it. And so we had the bill written, and I introduced the bill that created the photographic laminated driver's license of the state of Florida in 1967. And we passed it. We had to put a fee on it for additional fee, and that was not real popular to increase the fees for driver's licenses. But to me, it was one of the best things that I personally ever did in the Florida House of Representatives, was to create that bill that created the Florida driver's license as we know it today, and it's still in effect today. They have done some improvements on it through Polaroid and the people who provide the services to the state of Florida. But I think it was a great thing because it's very difficult to counterfeit. It's very difficult to change, and we needed to have that. And now, as we see, driver's licenses countrywide have really become almost the choice of identification. Anywhere you go today, and when you have to produce identification, people want to see your driver's license. So you flip out your little plastic illuminated, laminated card that John Ryals helped create in 1967. And I'm real proud of that legislation.
I bet passing the fee was a pretty tough job.
It was. It was tough in the House and it was tough in the Senate. To be very honest with you, we had a hard time with it. But finally, both the House and the Senate realized the importance of this legislation and what it would mean to future generations of Floridians to have something like this as their personal identification. And I caught a lot of heat over it. I caught a lot of heat back home over it. Not nearly quite as much heat as I caught in my later legislative career when I was chairman of the Committee on House Administration for 6 years and chairman of the Committee on Joint Legislative Management for 6 years, when we raised the legislative salary from $100 a month to $1,000. I really caught some heat on that. That was also, I was a prime sponsor of that bill too. And we caught a lot of heat about that. But, you know, it was, in both cases, Mike, it was the thing to do. It was something that needed to be done. The driver's licenses need to be updated, and the legislative salary needed to be updated as well.
Well, let's talk about Claude Kirk, since you brought him up. And what's your best Claude Kirk story? I mean, in meetings or?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, I was a staunch Democrat in those days. I say in those days because I no longer am a Democrat. I'm now a registered Republican. I changed when Bob Martinez was governor of the state of Florida. I became a Republican. But back in those days, even though I was a staunch Democrat and Claude was a Republican, I still had a lot of respect and admiration for him. And to be honest with you, I liked him a lot on a personal level, man to man. I really liked the governor a great deal. And I think he was kind of fond of me. I remember, I guess the funniest thing ever happened. We were in Plant City one year, and he had been in office, I guess, about 2 or 3 years. And his popularity was beginning to wane a little bit. It wasn't quite what it used to be. He wasn't quite as popular because he had been involved in a lot of controversial things. And so they had the Strawberry Festival, luncheon and parade over in Plant City. And back in those days, Tampa Electric Company was the sponsor of that luncheon, and they had it at their headquarters there on their main offices in downtown Plant City on Haynes Street. And they always had served cocktails before the luncheon. And cocktail party started around 10:30 in the morning and went till about noon, and then everybody went in and had a little bite to eat. Usually about 1 o'clock, about 12:30 or 12:45, you walked out of the building and they had all the cars lined up out there, all the convertibles for the dignitaries to ride in because that was at the front of the parade. Well, my popularity, I must say, was extremely high at that point. I'd been in the legislature 3 years and things were going well for me. People had gotten over the sting of the increase in the driver's license, and they were really beginning to like the new driver's license. And we had done some other things. We'd been involved in a number of other good pieces of legislation involving University of South Florida in Tampa. And Governor Kirk was very much aware, I think, of the difference in the popularity. My popularity, and I'm not trying to be braggadocious about it, it was just a fact because that was my hometown. That's where I was born and raised, and we carried 90% of the vote out of there. And his popularity was kind of going down a little bit. So during the cocktail party, he came over to me and he said, "Ryals," he said, "welcome to your hometown." I said, "Thank you, Governor. It's nice to be here." And he said, "I want you to do me a favor." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I want you to ride with me in the parade." Now, Mike, he had his car with his name on it. And I had my car with my name on it. I'm about 4 or 5 cars behind the governor in the parade. And he said, "I want you to ride with me." I said, "Governor, I can't do that." I said, I have my own car with my name on it. To have a volunteer driver would not be fair to that lady who's volunteered to drive me, to just leave her sitting there with nothing to do or drive that car with no one in it. He said, "We will take the name off your car and put it on mine. It'll be under my name, but we'll put it on mine." And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't do that. I have to ride my own car." He said, "You're going to rue the day you made this decision." I said, "Well, probably so, but that's my decision." This was early in the cocktail party. Okay, cocktail party went on for probably about an hour and a half. Around noon, we went in, we had a little bite to eat. I kind of lost track of the governor. And around 12:30, everybody started walking out of the building to go to their cars. And all of a sudden, I heard my name called again. It said, "Ryals." Now, we're outside the building. And I turned around, and he's about 15 yards, I guess, behind me. He said, "Come here." I said, "No, I'm going to ride my own car," you know. And I turned my back on him and just started walking away. And the next thing I know, kaplop, I get hit in the back of the head with a strawberry. He's back there throwing strawberries at me, just calling me all kind of names, you know. And it was, I turned and looked at him and I said, "You're terrible. You're a disgrace to the governorship of the state of Florida." He said, "I'll get you, Ryals. I'll get you," you know. It was all in good fun and great jest, but that's the funniest story ever about me and Claude Kirk.
Now, the idea that you sponsored the salary increase and he vetoed it after saying that he would support it. I mean, did you have some one-on-ones with him over that?
Well, yeah, mostly hollering at each other, you know, from afar. Bumped into him one day out at Tallahassee Airport, and he was giving me holy Jehoshaphat about that. He just didn't like it, and I told him, you know, that it was something we really needed to do, and I felt very strongly about it, and we'd do everything we could to override him. And so, you know, but he didn't like it at all. But I think really, and I can't speak for the governor, what his motivation was. I've always highly suspected it was greatly political, but other than that, you know, who knows?
No, I thought he had signed on to say, okay, let's raise the salaries.
Well, yeah, he did, but he changed his mind, you know, like he would often do. Yeah, but that's okay. We all go through those periods in our political careers where we have a change of heart about things, but not quite as dramatic as this one. You know, this was pretty tough to take.
So back when you were newly elected as well, there was the teachers' strike.
Oh, yes.
Talk to me about what you know about how that came about and
That's been a long time ago. I do remember right after I was elected, that we had the teacher walkout, and I remember a principal that I had a lot of respect and admiration for, Don Yoho, had walked out with the teachers, and he was principal, I think, at Chamberlain High School, and had walked out, and they had called this meeting at the Civic Center in Brandon, and had invited me to come, and I went, and I listened to and you got to understand, this was all pretty much brand new to me at that point, but I listened to their concerns, and I listened to their statements, and then I spoke, and really don't recall exactly what I said, other than, you know, I had a lot of empathy in my heart for the teachers, and that we were going to do the best we could to try and correct the situation. I'm not sure how well my remarks went over. I really didn't get a rounding stand of applause that night. I remember that. It was a very hostile crowd. And we left, and then we came back to Tallahassee, and we tried to work on it and did the best we could with it.
That's when sales tax went from 3 to 4 cents, I think?
I believe that's correct, yeah. Yeah, that was another tough one. But then again, you know, there are just times when you have to bite the bullet and do what you honestly believe is right and not what is right politically. You just gotta do it. Just like with the tax increase, the 3 to 4%, you know, the legislative salary increase from $100 to $1,000, the additional fee on the driver's license, all those things are justifiable costs of the government doing business. And the only people we have to get the money from is the people. So, you know, you just got to do it sometimes.
E.C. Rowell was rules chairman when you came. Talk to me about him. He'd been speaker. He was very powerful.
Oh, no doubt about it. E.C. Ryals was from Wildwood, good Florida native boy. He was almost in total control. As Rules Committee chairman, he decided basically what bills were going on the calendar and which ones were not. So if you were in good favor with EC, you wanted to get something on the calendar, you had to go to his office and almost get down on your knees and say, Mr. Speaker, please, you know, can we possibly get this on the floor? And he'd take a quick look at it and he'd say, well, I no, boom. And that was it. Or he'd say, yeah, it's okay. And that was it. And basically whatever EC said, that was what happened on the floor of the House of Representatives. He pretty much controlled it.
How do someone amass power like that? I mean,
I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen power since then to that extent, other than perhaps with Dempsey, when Dempsey was president of the Senate. Just awesome power to be held in the hands of one individual. But EC, I will, to his credit, I think was a very fair man. If it was a good bill and a good piece of legislation, I've seen EC put the things on the calendar that he didn't particularly like, but he'd let you get it on there, give you a fair hearing on it, simply because he thought it was the right thing to do. I got along well with E.C. Rowell. I thought I liked him very much. He was not a personal friend, but he was a friend, and I could always go to E.C. and talk to him anytime.
What kind of advice would he give you when you do that?
Well, basically keep your head low, and and don't get off on any wild tangents, boy. You know, and as I recall, E.C. wasn't all that happy about the driver's license thing, but then we had some boys from the Department of Public Safety went and talked to him, and he kind of said, well, okay. He didn't like the fee increase. Nobody liked the fee increase. But he could also see the benefits coming from that program. So he allowed us to go forward with it.
Some thinking that the turnpike terminates in Wildwood because of him.
Well, I don't know. It's geographically, I think it was probably a logical place for it to terminate. Yeah.
There was a move, and there was a plaque on the plaza level of the new Capitol that was put there actually during your final years of the legislative process, dedicating the building to Lee Weisenborn. How serious, when you first got to Tallahassee, was there an effort to move the Capitol somewhere else in Florida?
It was pretty serious. It was a pretty serious effort indeed. And I remember Don Tucker, who was from this area, came to me very early and said, you know, we've got a real problem. He said, this guy wants to move the Capitol. And Tucker lobbied me hard on it. And frankly, I couldn't see a lot of justification in it. Plus the history. There's so much history in Tallahassee. Being the first capital of the state, you know, between Pensacola and Jacksonville, halfway point practically. It just seemed to me that it would be very destructive from a historical standpoint to move the capital. From a financial standpoint, it would have almost bankrupted the state of Florida. So I could not see any justification in it. Even though we all knew that Orlando was going to grow tremendously. We knew that Orlando had really become probably the central part of the state of Florida from a population standpoint. To me, your history and your preservation of it is so much more important. And we have state offices all over the state of Florida to service the people of the state. So it's not like if you want to do something through the state of Florida, you got to come to Tallahassee for it. You can go to any state office anywhere in the state and take care of your business. So, yeah, but it was a serious move at that point, Mike. No doubt about it.
You've gone to the annual sessions now with the beginning of the 69 session. Mm-hmm. Give me a contrast of the difference from a member's perspective. You were here for that, although you were here a long time in 67, to the pay differences, the staffing differences, the new office building. Give me a sense of, from a member's perspective, the difference it made in you doing your job.
I think it made a great deal of difference. The state of Florida was a rapidly growing state, even back in those days, and for us to meet only once, you know, every a couple of years, it just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. You needed to go to annual budgets. You needed to go to keep your finger on the pulse of government on an annual basis, and so it, I think, was the thing to do. It has certainly helped the people of the state. It put a lot of burden on the members of the legislature to do it, and the $1,000 a month in compensation increase, it was okay, but it really didn't take care of all the work that we were having to do in those days. The staffing was beginning to grow, and that was of great help to us. The more staff we had, the better job we could do, the better research we could do, and so all of those things started to come together, and I think it was a good thing for it to happen.
Some have said that was that change in '68's Constitution was when the legislature reasserted itself and became an equal branch of government.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that. Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. Prior to that, the legislature was really not an equal branch of government. It was a branch that functioned under the auspices almost of the governor and the cabinet, because we had, as you know, a strong cabinet system in the state of Florida. So after that, yeah, I would certainly agree with that statement that we did become, or we were on the way to becoming. We didn't immediately become an equal branch of government, but we were on the way.
Talk to me about the reapportionment in 19 70, 72. What was that like? Because you were, what, 4 years in the legislature then? You probably were starting to have some influence, and this was the time the Senate lost 8 members, I think. And
Yeah, and we went through reapportionment again. And as I recall, we went then from Hillsborough, Pasco, Hernando, and Citrus, having 4 counties and I guess it was 7 members or 9 members in the delegation. We lost Hernando, Citrus, and Pasco counties. We lost part of Tampa, and we picked up western Polk County, all the way into Bartow, up through Lakeland, or skirted around Lakeland, at the Kathleen in that area. We went from having local bill hearings in Crystal River, Inverness, Brooksville, Dade City, to having local bill hearings in Tampa, Bartow, and in Lakeland. And that was the first time that we really, and Lawton Childs was the senator from, the Florida senator, House senator from Polk County. And so we had a lot of interaction with Lawton on local bills that affected Polk County, and it was okay. From a geographical standpoint, it was great because we didn't have that large geographical area that we had to cover anymore. And when I say cover it, we really covered it because we would have local bill hearings in all those counties. And we got to know the elected public officials in all those counties. And so it was sort of a relief to have a smaller district, more compact, and especially one like the western side of Polk, where we didn't have so far to travel. It was great for me living in Brandon because I had moved from Plant City to Brandon in 1962, 2 years before I ran for the House. So it was great. It was okay.
how much of an influence did the old pork chop forces have when you were first elected here?
Oh, a lot. A lot.
Describe how it would be affected.
Well, you got to look at people like E.C. Ryals, Dempsey Barron, great guys, and who wielded a lot of power over legislation. And so the pork chop guys, in the very beginning, were totally in control. As we went through reapportionment, time again, their power started to diminish, and it was more equally spread out. You mentioned Richard Pettigrew from Miami, speaker. Richard wielded a lot of power, and to have a speaker from Miami, that was okay. And then we had Terrell Sessoms from Tampa. So the pork choppers' power started diminishing with reapportionment. Without reapportionment, they would still be in control. Just that simple.
This idea that we have an urban speaker from Miami, another one from Tampa in successive years, what impact did that have on what the legislature did and looking at the urban agenda?
Oh, tremendously. Remember that when Sam Gibbons was in the Senate of the state of Florida, passed a bill creating the University of South Florida. But that's really all it did, was to create the University of South Florida and help fund it and get it started, get it going. Well, when you have people like from Dick Pettigrew from Miami, you have Terrell Sessoms from Tampa, and you had Fred Schultz from Jacksonville, and I must say even Ralph Turlington from Gainesville. These were all speakers who were very educationally oriented to higher education. And so look at what we were able to do at the University of South Florida, for instance. I was there when we helped to create University of South Florida School of Medicine. So many different things in Tampa, for instance. The med school at University of South Florida, the Hillsborough County Aviation Authority. We created that. I say we, I'm one of the member of the delegation from Hillsborough County. we now have the best airport in the United States. We created the Aviation Authority. We created the Sports Authority. We created the Turnpike, or the Expressway Authority. So you've got the results of that urbanization of these speakers, and you can see it everywhere, especially on the west coast of Florida. You can see it in the city of Tampa, which I represented, along with people like Terrell Sessoms and Paul Danahy and a lot of good guys that really were interested in seeing that the right thing be done now that the pork choppers were not in such total control. Even though I don't mean to leave the impression the pork choppers were all bad. They did a lot of good things for the state of Florida too. It was just time in our history to move on. It was time for the money to be put where the people were, and I think that's exactly what happened during those period of years when those speakers from the urban counties were in power.